Welcome, Astro listeners, to tonight's Mercury Retrograde forecasting webinar. This is Media Monk, better known as Leroy in the Evolutionary Astrology Network. I'm joined by Kim Marie on the other line, better known as Star Lady on the forecasting podcast that many of you are familiar with, and we'll get to her in just a minute. I did want to, this is a free Mercury retrograde webinar, so I just wanted to point out a couple of things to anybody that'd be new out there, some of the newer people to this webinar format. You might see on your laptop screen or your computer screen by now a little orange menu, a vertical bar, so to speak, with an orange arrow. You might want to play with that a little bit. Click on it. It'll open up some capabilities, your own control panel. But you'll see the short list here is the icons are very self-explanatory. If you're mic'd with a USB headset and or Apple earbuds, something like that, into your computer, you could interact if Kim Marie invites that interaction. Ask your own question. Raise your hand as well on the board. And that is that green microphone button, and you can mute. If you play with that, you can everybody's in muted format right now, but it will actually allow you to unmute yourself and ask a question. Several other things are available there. The bottom orange bubble is, of course, a chat menu. We do have question and answers that we do prefer to have any Q&A to take place on. You can type in your questions on that Q&A board. I'll take that and try to answer the questions the best of my ability. If not, I'll invite Kim Marie to expand on such a question through that Q&A board. Just also wanted to note that we do have an Astro newsletter list that we do announce our free weekly podcasts on the website. You can enroll on the bottom of any page of our website at evolutionaryastrology.net. And of course, we continue to do forecasting webinars like this for the general public. And there's two ways to enroll in those when they are not free. We do charge $15 for most of our live webinar events. It's a 2-hour event. You can enroll on the forecasting webinars page of the website or get on that Astro newsletter list, and we'll send you an event newsletter from time to time when the current transits dictate that we have such a forecasting webinar event. No worries if you can't participate live, if you do enroll to participate live, because we always send out a PDF with all the audio links, the permanent video link of the live webinar, as well as the slides for printout after this event. You'll get that in an email from Media Monk at evolutionaryastrology.net in the next day or two. And with that, I welcome you on tonight's Mercury Retrograde and Capricorn Aquarius call, and I'll turn it over to Kim.
All right, thank you, Leroy. So welcome to Mercury Retrograde, January 5th through the 25th of 2016. You can see on your screen here, Mercury's going to go retrograde at 1 degree Aquarius and direct at 15 Capricorn. Before we get into tonight's material, though, here we are with the 3 ways you can study with us at EAN. Leroy talked about the free weekly audio podcasts. We have our Astro Library, and we have our multimedia course. Here is the Astro Library. You can subscribe to one of the 3 sections you see on your screen, or all 3 sections. So you can subscribe 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. Here is EAN's multimedia course, and you can see the 3 segments on your screen. Currently, segment 1 and 2 are available with all of the materials and the DVDs, or digital only, or you can get segment 1 and 2, both physical and digital materials. Stay tuned. One of our 2016 goals is to make segment 3 also available on a digital basis. Here we are again with tonight's material. Every time we have a Mercury retrograde, we do a free public webinar to help introduce the public to astrology in general, EAN, Evolutionary Astrology Network in particular, and to help people, like Leroy was just saying at the beginning, become a little familiar with this webinar format. Many of you are attending live, however, a lot of you either watch it again or attend after the fact, which is perfectly fine. First of all, a couple of general slides that will be scattered throughout. From the perspective of astrology in general, EA, evolutionary astrology specifically, why planetary retrogrades? The principle of psychological compensation is being out of sync with your own true nature of who you essentially are. Now, most souls, regardless of evolutionary state of consciousness, will have psychological compensations in order to appear normal. These compensations take place anywhere there is a sense of dissatisfaction. Now, status quo will give strong clues to the kinds of compensation for each planetary archetype, meaning we can have these psychological compensations for any planet. And we will look for that via the sign house and aspects of any planet, the evolutionary state of consciousness within the soul, consensus, individuating, spirituating, and of course the specific environmental conditionings that any soul is coming through. For instance, to give you an example of status quo with Mercury, everybody has a consensus thought about what's going on planet Earth right now. For instance, if you are a consensus state Republican, you are probably in love with the U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump. However, maybe one of you or two of you, there could be some Republicans out there that are not in love or even like Donald Trump. But due to the pressure of consensus state, and you went to the meeting or the, God, what do they call those things in Iowa, where they all get together and talk and decide, you don't want to stick out, so you're quiet. You don't say anything. Caucus. Thank you, honey. So status quo is going to be what's the quote-unquote norm. And if we're not strong enough to break out of it, we compensate for it. So planetary retrogrades offer us an opportunity to break free from whatever those conditioning status quo archetypes are and to align with who we naturally are, regardless of consensus or group or religion or other various conditioning factors. Now, planetary retrogrades are a geocentric phenomena, meaning geocentric, Earth-centered. Earth's the center of the universe from the geocentric perspective. Retrogrades are more powerful because that's always when the planet is the closest to Earth. And retrogrades also, again, cause that withdrawal from the status quo to redefine a planetary archetype according to individual and natural law. The retrograde planetary archetype is always non-static, meaning it's in a perpetual state of evolution. Planetary retrograde by sign and house will define the manifestation, and the opposite sign and house will provide clarity, objectivity, and expression. And always, answers to any retrograde lessons, regardless of the planet, will come from within ourself. We're throwing things off to arrive at an essential of ourself. Now, astronomy on Mercury. Only takes 88 days to go around the sun, but because the Earth is traveling around at the same time, Mercury appears to go around the sun or the zodiac more or less once a year. Its daily mean motion is about 1.5 degrees. It has 3 to 4 retrograde cycles per year. 2016 is one of those years where we are sandwiched with 4 retrograde cycles. Excuse me, sneeze out of nowhere, tried to minimize my headset. Mercury's retrograde period varies a bit from 20 to 24 days, and when it stands still in the sky, getting ready to turn retrograde or turn direct, It actually stands still for approximately 24 hours if we watched it in the sky. And as you can see here, becomes very noticeable in the zodiac when you study sun signs. You will never see Mercury more than 29 degrees away from the sun from the Earth's perspective. So in astrology, beginners learn that Mercury is always the sign before, the same sign as, or the sign after whatever your sun sign is. Here's a visual of a Mercury retrograde if we sat outside in the night sky and watched it every single night. Here we are in lavender, Mercury traveling along. It hits the pre-shadow, the point where it's going to go direct. It keeps going through. This is the first passage of the degrees it's going to travel 3 times. Here's where it goes stationary retrograde, which is the part of the cycle we're in right now. Here's where it reverses itself retrograde and makes the second passage over those degrees. Here's the Mercury direct we talked about. Here is post-shadow. And here's the point where Mercury leaves shadow, where it first turned retrograde, and moves on in new degrees. Now, all of the planetary retrogrades will more or less make this loop in the nighttime sky and travel so many degrees of the zodiac 1, 2, 3 times. Mercury retrograde patterns. The Mercury retrograde cycles reverse through the 4 elements: water, air, earth, and fire. And these retrogrades will spend approximately 1 year in one of the elements. For instance, 2016 is mainly the earth element. Then we'll have approximately a year's worth of retrogrades where Mercury's transitioning from one element into the next, again in a reverse manner. So here in 2016, the retrograde cycle, the first one's going to start in air and retrograde back to Earth, Aquarius to Capricorn. And then the rest of the retrogrades are going to take place in the earth element. We'll have one in Taurus, we'll have one in Virgo, and the last one is going to start in Capricorn, go back to Sag. What this adds up is Mercury is going to be in earth signs for 6 months in 2016. Think about this for a moment. Mercury in the element Earth for half of 2016. Earth is physical manifestations. Earth it's tangible. It wants to see it, touch it, taste it, know it, add it up in a bank account. Look at how Mercury rules communications, and now in this modern day, it rules all of your internet-friendly devices. It rules the vehicle which moves you from one place to another, be it a car, a bus, a bike, a train. It rules all these smartphones that we communicate with. So Mercury retrograde, half of the year in earth signs, just in and of itself could mean we have more activity going on, quote unquote, frustrations, breathe deep, with all of these electronic digital devices that we have. For instance, this morning I had done some pre-Mercury retrograde prepping a week ago, and I had saved some files, and the files had disappeared. Ended up on tech support with my computer software program. I got to give a shout out to, Cosmos Solutions Software. Faye and David Cochran, who have Kepler software that's now Sirius, and they took over WindStar. David was great and very patient with me on the phone today as we're heading into Mercury retrograde. So I had to go into a different way of doing something. I couldn't just copy and paste. I had to type things in. That takes a little while longer. I breathed through it. I want you to know that today, but there's my example just heading into this Mercury retrograde. So just kind of know this. It might even get to the point where it affects things we wouldn't think of as necessarily communicating with, maybe the dishwasher or the refrigerator or the hairdryer, but they are devices that make the details in life smoother and easier, so this might be part of it. Now next year, 2017, the retrograde cycles are in Earth and moving from Earth to fire. Very briefly, the Mercury retrograde archetype. At this point, Mercury rules two archetypes. The outer side of Mercury, talking about the polarity, active polarity, is Gemini in the third house. This archetype is active, mutable air. This is the archetype of the conscious mind, the left brain. It's how we all want to classify that manifested phenomenal world with facts and labels, words, figures, so that we can all have an ease of communication. So the Gemini third house, part of Mercury, again, rules all forms of communication, speaking, writing, etc. So that's how all these electronic devices of our computers and phones, etc., have become included in here. Now, a couple of words. Mercury through Gemini third house is the debater. They're clever, versatile. Of course, you many times know the twins, as you see with the Gemini sign in the background. They're excitable. They can be the trickster. They're adaptable, talkative, argumentative. They will point out that weak link in anything, and they will point out that Sag polarity, relativity of truth. Anytime the Sag ninth house polarity wants to become holier than thou, Gemini, the third house, can always find the weaker link on that path to universal, timeless truth. Now, these slides are never an absolute inclusive. There's always a detail or two, Mercury, that we won't necessarily have on the slide. Hopefully it will just pop in through as we move through these slides. The inner side of Mercury is the archetype of Virgo in the sixth house. And inner comes from the passive polarity. Here we have the mutable modality and we have the earth element. While it's still the conscious mind and the left brain, what happens here is we start moving along to that ability to analyze and reason and self-reflect, to start putting all the pieces together so that they make sense. It is also an archetype of self-improvement. Virgo is that what we call that transitional archetype from the egoism of Aries through Leo on into Libra through Pisces, being the other and working from outside of self versus inside or egoic part of self, Aries through Leo. Now, this Virgo sixth house archetype also contains, via its polarity, Pisces in 12th house, what in EA we call sadomasochism. This is guilt linked to atonement via the human-made religious laws, norms, customs we have on planet Earth. When we have guilt linked to atonement, that's not quite. Guilt linked to atonement, yes it is. Guilt linked to atonement is victim and masochism. Guilt linked to anger is victor and sadoist. And so we have distortions from what we call natural law here with this archetype. This is what is underneath Virgo having that inner outer criticism to itself. This is what's underneath Virgo getting into that self-doubt and procrastination, the worry and anxiety as you see on your screen. In its natural expression, though, what this archetype is learning how to go from the fullness of Leo to the sense of being able to honor another or even serve another or society, so that we learn how to be an equal with another in Libra. So again, a natural expression here is that good old self-improvement linked to service to a greater whole in some way. Here are your little quick facts on this Mercury retrograde in Aquarius-Capricorn, going from conjunction to conjunction. Now the conjunctions in black are when Mercury was full speed ahead on the other side of the sun, and it's passage in the underworld is always longer here than it is when it's retrograde, all right? But this is a complete Mercury retrograde cycle from exterior conjunction to exterior conjunction. Here's where Mercury entered that pre-shadow, December 19th, where it first went 15 Capricorn. Here's Mercury retrograde, January 5th, 1 Aquarius. Here's the highlight of the Mercury retrograde cycle, the interior conjunction to the sun. This means that Mercury is between the Earth and the sun. And it's reminding me that we're going to have Mercury transit over the face of the sun. Excuse my noise, because I didn't get this in a slide, so I want to give you this information. I will next time. It's next Mercury retrograde coming along. May 9th, Mercury will pass in front of the sun at about 19.5 degrees Taurus, and it will be visible. You will be able to, with your special sunglasses, see Mercury's black dot in front of the sun in the eastern part of North America, northern South America, Arctic, Greenland, and northwestern Africa, Western Europe. More on that with the next Mercury retrograde that's going to be coming up in Taurus, April, May. Mercury direct, January 25th. Here's where it reaches and turns and goes forward again. Here's where Mercury leaves the shadow, February 14th. Again, highlight of any planetary retrogrades are the conjunction to the sun with Mercury, Venus, oppositions to the sun with Mars through Pluto. Now here, Mercury retrograde in this particular cycle is going to spend 58 days, 2 months in Capricorn, 29 days, a month in Aquarius. Excuse my burp. Mercury first entered Capricorn December 9th through January 1st. We all know January 1st entered Aquarius, going retrograde on the 5th, reverses back to 30 degrees Capricorn on the 8th, January 8th through February 13th in Capricorn here, and then goes direct January 25th, and then it moves back into Aquarius February 13th through March 5th. So this is quite a long time period. Mercury averages 2 to 3 weeks in a sign of the zodiac. And so when it's moving at its fastest, it's barely in a sign for 2 weeks. So for it to slow down and spend 2 months in the Earth sign of Capricorn, everything you know about the archetype of Capricorn, self-responsibility, self-determination, maturation, who gets the control and the power? How are we going to accept everything in our life? What can we change? What can we not change? Everything you know as an archetype of Capricorn is going to be up for discussion through this Mercury retrograde. Now, Aquarius will too. But more on this, because Mercury turns retrograde the first degree in Aquarius. It's like a kabang to get our attention, and then it moves back into Capricorn to methodically process through whatever the Aquarian surprises and upsets have been. Specifically to Mercury retrograde, this is a time period to release excess thought. Our left brain, conscious mind, saturated. It's hard to take information in. How many times do you want to make a decision right as Mercury's going retrograde and it's just, you're just overwhelmed. Your mind's blowing. How many times have you made a decision, Mercury retrograde, and you end up having to redo it, or something changes, or Mercury retrograde later, it comes back around to be dealt with? It is a time to review and release these worn-out mental patterns. Then Mercury retrograde always, regardless of the sign, is taking us from left brain to right brain. Because as ruler of Gemini, the polarity point points to Sagittarius and Jupiter. Mercury ruler of Virgo, polarity point points to Pisces and Neptune. When Mercury's retrograde, the entire mutable quadrant is activated. Mutable modality, change, adapt, release, go with the flow. This is a time period to turn inward and quiet our mind and learn to think for oneself, to trust intuition first, again, regardless of sign, logic and facts second. It's finding quiet time in the busyness of a retrograde overload. All the details we've got to take care of. Just think about it. Mercury going retrograde the day after the Monday following the Christmas and New Year's holiday. Who doesn't feel the busybodiness of that? Who didn't look forward to a particular little break? And then all of a sudden, we've got to hit the ground running this week. Now, next year, Mercury's going to go retrograde December 19th, 2016. Next year's Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, Sagittarius will be during the Christmas, New Year's holiday time period if you have an occupation in which you get a break during that time period. Mercury retrograde in general, multiple communications until we reach clarity. Whether it's inner or outer, whoever it's with, it's okay to communicate it again and again and again. Leroy came up and asked me a detailed question because I realized that I have a class planned for a day that I have to get on an airplane. And he goes, well, how do you want to reschedule all this? And I'm like, honey, I'm so focused on Mercury retrograde, I didn't even understand what you asked me. Can I talk to you about it tomorrow when I can look at it a little closer, or more realistically, maybe later this week after Mercury starts to really move backwards again? Mercury retrograde doesn't mean you don't do anything. Sometimes you have to sign that piece of paper. Sometimes you have to make that decision to do something different right when Mercury's turning retrograde. Take a breath. Just handle crossing the T's and dotting the I's as best as you can. I've told this story before. I had a time period where I lived out of a suitcase in airplanes for 3 years, and one time I landed in a major city, had to drive to the inner city area to give a presentation and fly out the next day. Rental car less than 24 hours. They said I damaged the back end of the car getting my suitcase out. I saw all the bumps and stuff. For some reason, didn't mark it on the paper. That probably was my learning curve. And so it took me till the next Mercury retrograde for them to drop the charges of me being responsible for fixing their vehicle. So the point is, don't always judge it if you sometimes have to take care of those details at this point when Mercury's turning retrograde. But the details are paying attention and understanding that it may take doing it more than one time. And if you are, this one right here, if you are wanting to just brush over it and I'll correct it later, no, Mercury retrograde, try and just take the time to do it correctly or whatever's the highest, best way. That's the purpose of Mercury retrograde. And of course, gaining clarity on the best course of mental actions and the implementation of new mental affirmations and patterns that work best for us. Now, in general, a lot of astrology, especially with the major aspects, will miss the fact that Mercury moves so fast it is always active or aspecting several planets during its retrograde cycle. And this retrograde cycle is particularly important with that. This Mercury retrograde has 10 different aspects to 9 planets and 1 point in space. It is the busiest retrograde of 2016. I don't know if I'd say it's the harshest retrograde because the Mercury retrograde in April, May in Taurus is sandwiched right in the midst of a Mars retrograde in Sag Scorpio. So that might be the more frustrating one, but this is going to be the busiest Mercury retrograde. Out of those 10 different aspects, it turns out here, if we add all of this up, there are 33 Mercury retrograde aspects, shadow, retrograde, shadow, that we have to go through. And we've already went through almost a third of them with the pre-shadow. So we're a third of the way through. Yahoo! Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. So Mercury's only there for that 1 week, remember? January 1st through the 8th, and it only gets to 1 degree Aquarius 3 minutes. It just barely gets to the 1st degree. What may happen is there's the possibility of mental and physical shocks and upsets. It's Aquarius 11th house and ruler Uranus. Shock and awe, shock and trauma. And so it's possible that we could have some of that at the beginning of this retrograde cycle. Maybe some of you have already experienced this. Maybe there will be something that will come along here. Our young adult is going through this on a mental process because he decided to procrastinate or redo his first semester of college, and he thought he could just wait till August, and he only gets 6 months. So last week he found out he's either back in school next week or he has to go and start all over again. So he's in a little bit of mental overwhelm right now because he thought he could float for 8 months instead of what it turned out to be 2. So we all get these things that just are going to pop up out of the blue. They're not really out of the blue. It's the unconscious making things conscious via the archetype of Aquarius. Whatever does come up here, it needs to be processed through with self-responsibility. Here's the retrograde in Capricorn during the rest of the retrograde cycle. So if there are some ahas, upsets, shocks, trauma dramas, you have this Mercury retrograde to understand them, process through. And of course, we can have the famous communication mishaps going on because Aquarius, again, is an air sign, which is communications. We can have social overload, friendship situations coming through. Part of this can be from New Year's reality checks. Oh my gosh, I've had my New Year's Eve cocktails and I made all these plans with my friends. And oh my gosh, it sounded so good on that second, third cocktail. And now this week we're going, what did I do? How am I going to pay for that? So we can have some of those situations going on. We will also find in general that these New Year's Eve visions and intentions are going to be redone and reevaluated and redone and reevaluated. And of course, the best way to achieve a New Year's goal is attempting to do it again and again and again and again and again, regardless of a Mercury retrograde. And how many times do we set the goal? We make it a week, 2 days, a month. So can we fine-tune whatever it is we're envisioning this year and really work with this Mercury retrograde, especially as it goes back into Capricorn, and laying down that process to achieve the goal, Capricorn. Now remember, oh no, we didn't talk about this yet. Again and remember, I think, are some of my most repeated words when I get in my teaching mode. I don't even always recognize myself doing it. Thank you, Mercury retrograde. Aquarius is fixed modality, persevere, steady Eddie, stubborn, comfortable and secure here. And of course, that air element is communications. So here's that ability to really break free from old thoughts, old communication patterns, because Aquarius is jarring the brain. It's waking us up. We will also have, because Aquarius, 11th house ruler Uranus, is the individuated unconsciousness. We will find things from below the surface, breaking through to the surface and into consciousness. Maybe one or two of you have had some past life memories pop up, or you had a dream of some past life and it was so intense you couldn't help but wake up or remember it in the morning and pondering, what does it all mean? Again, Mercury retrograde pointing towards Sag and Pisces, pointing towards the intuition. There's deeper understandings that keep wanting to pop through. But Mercury turning retrograde in Aquarius can just be re-triggering trauma right now. We also must be careful of mental elitism. Elitism is an Aquarian word. Aquarius works with social groups, tribe, like-mindedness. And in the Aquarius-Leo polarity are those who can have a sense of, I'm better than you. Leo, top of the pyramid, the king-queen complex. Well, the Aquarius polarity is the elitism of any society. And so we can be gravitating towards, I know better. Fixed air. Listen to me. To cover up conscious and unconscious insecurities. Reflect on that one. There are, right as Mercury turns stationary retrograde at 1 degree Aquarius, 2 Mercury first quarter squares, crises and actions to Mars. So this is contributing to this feeling of a busyness overload with New Year, holidays, Christmas, solstice, whatever, and all of a sudden back to the routine. And this is also where we are having to take considered actions, Mercury retrograde, and really want to be working on some emotional detachment before taking action. This is coming from the Cancer polarity to Capricorn that Mercury is going to back up into. Now, many of you might remember Mars in Libra, tail end, getting ready to move into Scorpio. That's also adding to the emotional intensity going on. It can be activating some relationship stuff as well. I have a slide specifically on Mercury Aquarius, but I just want to point out how the beginning of this retrograde had Mercury square Mars, December 29th, Capricorn, Libra, 27 degrees. Then it has the second square, January 5th, 1 degree Aquarius, Scorpio, 2 hours before Mercury turns retrograde at, I got a slide for this, I want to say 6:06 a.m. We'll find out with the slide. So these Mercury-Mars squares are adding to this intensity of the stationary retrograde as well. There's going to be, there's this frustration that I've got to do it, I got to do it, I got to do it, I got to do it. And to the point that you can pace yourself or perhaps just slow down for a moment might help you with the highest and best actions for yourself and others through this first week of January. Now, as Mercury retrogrades back into Capricorn, remember I was talking about the fact that, 33 different aspects Mercury's going to make in this retrograde cycle, the busiest one. Every single one of these aspects, Mercury's in Capricorn except 4. So help me with my math. 33 minus 4. 29 of those 33 aspects have Mercury in Capricorn. So security buttons are extremely pushed with this retrograde cycle. Whether it's home, the Cancer polarity, career in Capricorn, resources Capricorn, whatever you would see dealing with Capricorn, Cancer archetypes. Family comes in here as well. Capricorn, I want to have control of everything in my outer world in order to feel secure. And what's happening here is everything in that outer physical world is being shook up, Mercury retrograde. And the lesson is replacing outer physical security issues with inner emotional Cancer polarity and mental Mercury security. So there will be some things in that outer world you have an ability to control and shift and handle. And there's going to be things beyond your control that you just really have to go inward with in order to be okay. So we are going to have instinctive thought patterns that just want to take control of those situations, and it's going to make for frustration and when we recognize we can't control it. So here's the excess thoughts to release. Here's the new inner mental patterns to go with. What can I control? What are the affirmations that I need to replace? What are the new mental thoughts and patterns that I need to create? I am okay in my world regardless of what's going on out there, especially what's going on out there maybe halfway across the world or maybe next door. We have to search for patience that allows the situations to be worked out over time, Capricorn. Again, Mercury retrograde is going to get so frustrated because, boom, I want to handle it right now. And a Mercury retrograde in Capricorn and all of these aspects that are going to go on, you want to delay, if possible, to allow things to unfold over time, to give you another piece of information and another understanding and another inner reflection here, so that you can make hopefully highest and best decisions if it's at all possible to do so. Some situations we'll be able to. Other situations we won't be able to. I'm going to hop on an airplane, Mercury retrograde. I can only control space-time so much in regards to my workload before I better have my clothes packed and I better have that shuttle out to the airport. I can't move time. We have to learn how to honor ourselves here, beyond that outer world, beyond the workaholism and status in society. As I said before, talking about practicing what I preach, I felt so good this morning getting up because I had prepped all my Mercury retrogrades for all 4 of them for 2016. I prepped those all last week and woke up, the busiest one out of all 4, and couldn't find the files. They went into, well, who knows where they are. They went into file 13 somewhere, and I had to work to just really breathe. I had a few tough Scorpio words. I can be sharp with the best of them. And then I thought, no, practice what you preach. Let's calm down. And I says, I have the time to get on the phone and take 45 minutes. That's what it ended up, and speak to someone. But I got greater understandings of several things. And I'm like, it's okay. So can we work to, again, just be honoring of ourselves when we get frustrated with the physical world not going as we want it to this month. Now, some of the distortions, just a couple archetypes here with this Mercury retrograde in Aquarius-Capricorn. Putting this together, we're wanting to be in charge of that outer world, situations outside of ourselves, communications, other people, in order to feel secure, Cancer, and love, Leo, the polarities. And so watch yourself as you're going through those distortions, and watch where you want to project that responsibility for whatever it is onto somebody else, onto the boss, onto the job, onto family, onto your partner, onto your lot in life, onto whatever. One of the biggest lessons of Capricorn, again, is self-responsibility. If it's in our world, we have done something to co-create it consciously or unconsciously. And Mercury retrograde is going to let you throw off all the excuses. And you want to just accept, this is my world. This is how I've energized it to this point. If I see things I don't like, how am I going to choose to energize it differently? There can also be that inability to listen. This is Mercury retrograde in general, but here specifically to the degree our security buttons get pushed. So, deep breath. Never do something permanently foolish just because you are temporarily upset. When you try to control everything, you enjoy nothing. Sometimes you just need to relax, breathe, let go, and live in the moment. And this one right here, good old serenity prayer. Do not let what is out of your control interfere with all the things you can control. You can control whether or not you're going to choose to be happy during this Mercury retrograde. You can control whether or not you're going to feel peaceful regardless of your work overload or the pink slip or Cancer polarity needing to move in the middle of winter and snow. Now, Cancer polarity to Mercury retrograde, again, as you can see here, searching for that inner emotional and mental security first. Now, we need to have the inner conversations, that self-talk in our head, talking it through with ourselves in multiple ways until, again, we reach that inner homeostasis. Excuse me, my nose is just going through every so often. And we have to have that inner mental peace. How can I look at things differently as I'm achieving that inner mental peace? And you want to take the time to have those communications again and again and again, however many times necessary. You talk, you get triggered, you got to go back to your shell, that Cancer polarity, figure it out within yourself. Then you come back out and you communicate it again till the next trigger, and then you go back in again. And it's an ebb and flow. Capricorn, Cancer. Honoring when thoughts and words do not feel good. Okay, I'm having this communication with someone, or I just found out some news, or I'm looking at a situation and I'm getting this instinctive hit in my gut that something's not right. Why? And then can you go inward to search for why it's happening, why it doesn't feel right? Honor that gut instinct, Cancer polarity with Mercury. Why do I feel this way? Why is this coming up? And Mercury retrograde is going to be searching for the reason inside of yourself. Recognize that that outer world is not controllable, but how you react and respond to the situations is. Reaching for that self-worth, inner self-reliance, inner security beyond any outer situation. We can have all kinds of emotional buttons pushed with this Cancer polarity. I liked this one. I like to put quotes in my Mercury retrograde webinars. Relationships are harder now because conversations become texting. Arguments become phone calls, and feelings become status updates. Get off Facebook, get off your phone, and actually look someone in the eyeball if you can during Mercury retrograde communications. And if not, and you have to do it via that phone call over Skype, see if you can do it via a video. See if you can actually work to listen to the emotions and the tones. Mercury can hear so many different ways than just the words. With the Leo polarity, we are being asked to maintain and evolve a sense of our self-identity, Leo, through the changes that are happening in the outer world. Through all that busyness, through everything that's taking place that we can't control. We want to work for objectively listening. And we want to allow for fairness and equality with others. If we're on the victimization end of things, we may have to stand up for ourselves. If we're on the victorization side, we may have to listen to others and share with them. But we've got to go to Leo and find that sense of self to then go back over to that Aquarian objectivity. And this is going to be part of it. And this is going to be the last part of the retrograde cycle. It got triggered. It's being triggered this week with Mercury retrograde. That remember, as Mercury goes back into Aquarius February 13th, leaves shadow the 14th, and then moves through Aquarius. This is where we're really going to be working with the sense of self. And if we worked with this Mercury retrograde through that physical world, through the inner emotional world, then we can really be looking for a lot of new creativity in our life, February, March time period. So as we said, there's always many more aspects. There's the minor aspects, semi-sextiles, semi-squares, sesquisquadrates, inconjuncts, blah, blah. So evolutionary astrology utilizes the 360-degree cycle of phases and aspects to recognize how active Mercury really is during any retrograde cycle. Now here's just a little slide on that. Here is the cycle of phases and aspects from 0 to 360. In EA, we deal with 4 squares, a crescent square, a first quarter square, a disseminating square, and a last quarter square. We deal with 2 oppositions, gibbous and full. Now I'm watching more and more general astrology come to recognize that cycle of phases and aspects. It's one of the areas that I love to teach in astrology. I was blessed enough to just come across this very, very early on in my astrological studies 30 years ago. This is actually from the teachings of Jeffrey Wolf Green, based upon the teachings of Dane Rudier and his book, The Lunation Cycle. Here are all the retrograde aspects, and all of them are 3 times except where noted. And I decided, I always go, well, which way should I list them? Mercury retrograde. Do I list them the way they first happen, or do I list them by the retrograde? And I decided I wanted to list them via their actual retrograde sequence, because Mercury's so active at the beginning of the retrograde with the waxing squares to Mars, December 29th, January 5th. And Mercury stationary direct is very active with 2 waning squares and the conjunction to Pluto. Now, just in case you don't remember, mid-December when Mars was in Libra, it had the opposition to Uranus. It had the last quarter square to Pluto. We had the terrorist hits in Paris and San Bernardino. That's when we had the first Mercury aspects to Uranus, Pluto. We'll have the second and third ones while Mercury is turning stationary direct. So I'm going to go through these very quickly, breaking them down. Thank you for allowing me to do this. And I do have to say, those of you who partake in every one of these Mercury retrograde webinars are familiar with, at the tail end of these PowerPoint slides, I list all the Mercury aspects in chronological order. I couldn't do that this time due to my missing files that my software would not let me recreate. I had printouts, so I could not go A to B typing in 30 plus aspects. It was not physically possible. Mercury retrograde Capricorn, what I cannot control. But I can give you all of these dates via the aspect, and that's what we're going to do next. However, I wanted to show you, here's Mercury stationary retrograde, January or 6:06 a.m. Mountain Time. I always put everything relative to where I live, and I always use 0 degrees Aries house cusps to give us a generic chart that we can all relate to. Here you can see as Mercury turns retrograde tomorrow, for those of you who are attending live, here is that second waxing square to Pluto that just took place. As you can see, the Venus conjunctions, the Sun-Pluto conjunctions, that's square to Uranus. Everything is almost in the second half of the chart. A lot of empty spaces. There's just a lot of energy and activity. Second half of the zodiac, outer world. Now, it's just as active for all of us in our inner world as well. But I wanted to just point out these aspects with Mercury stationary retrograde. Here is Mercury's interior conjunction to the Sun, that halfway point. This is going to be, again, remember, January 14th. It will be 7:05 a.m. Mountain Time, and here is their conjunction 2349 Capricorn. This is the halfway point, the highlights and aha moments of the Mercury retrograde cycle. And if you can't make, if you can slow down or procrastinate any of the decisions pressing upon you right now, once Mercury goes past the Sun retrograde, the second half of the retrograde cycle from the interior conjunction to Mercury direct January 25th, it gets easier and easier to make decisions. So if you can wait till January 14th or later in making the decisions, as they come between the 14th and 25th, it's an easier, the second half of the retrograde cycle is easier than the first half. And as you can see by this interior conjunction, Venus will be square the nodes. Jupiter is very close to its conjunction with the North Node. Moon is on the South Node, so we're really got a lot of pondering going on here. These squares of Saturn to Neptune, Chiron, as we're trying to decide how do I move forward with my life. So, Mercury retrograde, deep reflections. What do I value? What is most important to me? Here's Mercury stationary direct, January 25th, 2:50 p.m. Mountain Time. And here's Mercury, as I said, making that second and third last quarter square to Uranus as it makes the second and third conjunction to Pluto. So let's break these down for you a little bit, all right? Here are Mercury's aspects to Venus. Mercury is ahead of Venus. So we have 2 waxing semi-squares and 1 waxing semi-sextile as Mercury reverses to Venus. So here we're always talking about the conscious mind, Mercury, and its values, Venus. Venus is always in various aspects to Mercury retrograde. The last Mercury retrograde in Libra, Mercury made 6 aspects to Venus. That was all that relationship activity last fall, if you remember. Now, when Mercury is ahead of Venus, which it is here, waxing, it's racing ahead without consideration of values. And so the Mercury retrograde back up is paying attention to Venus values. Mercury must re-evaluate its need to be right, Aquarius, and in control, Capricorn. And Mercury is going to support reaching for that inner self-worth. Cancer, emotionally. Leo, self-identity, inner self-worth. Mercury is going to point towards paying attention to this as it goes through these three particular Venus aspects. And you can see number 2 and number 3 are happening in the beginning and first half, more or less, of the Mercury retrograde cycle. Here are these 3 waxing squares to Mars. And again, you can see that we have that second one on the 5th, 2 hours before Mercury goes retrograde at 6 o'clock in the morning Mountain Time. Third one will not occur until early March, 2 months later after the shadow. And so, again, whatever is frustrating you right now, it will have calmed down by this point, and you will be in process of moving forward, crises in action, first quarter square, around however it is you are meant to do so. That give and receive as needs versus projections, manipulations, etc. are understood. Mars is in Libra, 2 aspects in Scorpio. Here's the giving and the receiving. We're still dealing with relationship situations here and how we're acting upon them. And are we projecting and manipulating Scorpio, Libra Scorpio? Or are we taking responsibility for ourselves in more and more objective ways in relationship? We want to be listening objectively, Aquarius, on deepest levels possible, Scorpio. As I pointed out again, these aspects are part of the retrograde T-square with Uranus and Pluto. So all we have to do, if you're following the news, look at the elitism and control maneuvers and violent outbursts that are taking place in the news today. The terrorist attacks that I mentioned before, Paris and San Bernardino, and if you're watching what's going on in the news recently between Iran and Iraq, I do have some charts for them a little later on. And the U.S. presidential elections, look at the conversations going on. Talk about a lack of respect taking place here. I'm ashamed that these people who want to lead our country are behaving this way. I'm not taking it personally, though, but it does have an effect on our relations with others, other countries. So what we've really got to be working for is a sense of fairness and equality coming through. I won't go into details. I'll try not to be too political tonight. But you can probably just spark your own recognitions of kind of what's going on here with the various relationships between countries that are taking place across the world right now. I've just been on a roll rolling my mouth, Mercury. So, listeners, Leroy, I hope you've been okay to ask me. You can ask questions relative to the material. I don't necessarily want any questions relative to somebody's personal chart. Typically, I don't have the time, and I like to wait to get past all the material before answering any questions from that regard. But if there is something to deal with an archetype of Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, Capricorn, and the Leo Cancer polarities that I'm not addressing, you are more than welcome to mention it to Leroy in the Q&A pane, or raise your hand to ask it if you have a muted headset to your internet device. Not a muted, if you have an active headset to your internet friendly device. I hear you.
Yes, just kind of wanted to let you know that the board is clear. Not a lot of Q&A so far. And we don't have any raised hands. If your hand was raised and you are open for a question relevant to the material, please raise your hand again and we'll acknowledge you. Other than that, I think it's good to move on, Kim.
All right, let me see if I can finish up working my way through every single planet. and the nodes with this Mercury retrograde. Of course, with Jupiter and Virgo. Yes?
Before you move on, of course, I invited a question. We had one of the astro listeners wanting to know if this Mercury retro in Aquarius this first week of January could be a reflection of this digital surveillance and spying issue that we're all familiar with, NSA related, giving away all of our secrets on the online.
That is part of the larger picture of Uranus in Aries waxing square Pluto in Capricorn. And David Cochran and I today were talking about the problems that I was having they are not with my software. They are with the antiviral software that we all have on our internet devices now. And the fact that if you're using a widely used program, say like Skype or Microsoft Word, the antiviral software usually knows how to work through that. But if you have an obscure astrology program, which is how it's considered with the broad masses of the world, and somebody is using the word star to have secret communications, my program WinStar, my antiviral communication is throwing everything into a black hole because it doesn't want my computer to get hacked. And so David, actually, if you are interested in any of this Mercury retrograde, we haven't checked it out, but he recommended a lot of people in the technical world antiviral software. They use ENOD as in dog, E as in elephant, N as in no, O, D as in dog 32 antiviral software. And the website is esetines.com. I need you just Google ENOD 32 antiviral software. I'm not remembering the website for sure. He didn't know the cost. I'm going to be checking it out so that my software programs can communicate easier and operate easier. So to answer your question, every time we have a Mercury retrograde, it will activate all of the hacking stories in the news. It will activate a lot of that stuff going on behind the scenes. Again, though, that broader picture is going to be Uranus in Aries and the explosion, Aries, of technology and hacking technology. The antiviral technology is having to just continually change and move and upgrade. And if you think you have problems, try being a too big to fail bank or Target that got, tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars wiped out trying to deal with that situations and make amends for it. So specifically, Mercury will shake it up, trigger it, the good old catalyst energy of Mercury. Mercury has co-rulership with Uranus of it because of the whole communications thing. But I think a broader rulership is going to go to Uranus and Pluto squares because we're doing all of the spying to have control over. We're trying to find out what the other person's doing in order to have control. So who knows, maybe by the time Mercury goes direct and it has its squares to Uranus, conjunctions to Pluto, we may have some hacking thing or whistleblower thing that breaks free in the news again. So Mercury's a part of the picture. Won't repeat myself anymore. If you have another question, Leroy, you're welcome to interrupt me at any time. By now you've looked at these aspects. Mercury is waxing trines to Jupiter, consideration of others and communications, being able to listen on a deep, psychological, and intuitive level. This is a waxing trine. This is the peacemaking aspect sandwiched between Mars, Uranus, Pluto in the midst of all this. And so what we want to search for here is an ability to accept self-responsibility for ourself, Virgo, for our words, Mercury. We can have deep intuitive sparks on how to self-improve, serve, move forward in whatever ways are best for us all. Distortions is when we want to get into all talk. Mercury's left brain, Jupiter's right brain, but not make the effort, Virgo. Inner outer criticisms, avoiding communications or skipping over those necessary communications and issues and making excuses, etc. Now, my little slide here, if you can't read it, I'm sorry you find communicating so difficult. Next time I'll read your mind. My little pun on Jupiter right brain intuition. Mercury retrograde, even with the nice trine, you want to make sure that you're not assuming. And you're not assuming that you think you know what that person said. Repeat it back to them. Leroy and I, when the weather's nice, do our famous walk and talks. And sometimes we'll end up on a conversation multiple times, but as we walk and talk, Jupiter likes to move too. In addition to Mars, it really does help get some clarity so we're on the same page when we come back in the house and we both go different directions with two computers. Mercury is waxing semi-squares to Saturn. That's where Mercury is 45 degrees past Saturn. It goes from new phase to crescent phase, which is yang to yin. And so as we're searching for these new beginnings here, we have to accept new self-truth, Sag, about our situations, Saturn, Capricorn, in life. We have to accept self-responsibility, Capricorn, for those situations in life. We want to have reflection, semi-square crescent phase, for deeper understandings of these situations in life. So there's always a seriousness with Mercury-Saturn. You know, Mercury-Jupiter, it's like, oh gosh, I'm just going to meditate and just, oh man, things are opening up for me and moving forward. Mercury-Saturn, oh yeah? Well, you better face reality. You know, you better be serious. Put your feet on the ground. There's a different energy, Mercury-Jupiter to Mercury-Saturn here, and they're both involved. Now, what can happen if we get into the distortions? The dishonesty with Sag, the insecurity leading to projections and control games, the refusal to accept the truth and self-responsibility. Wayne Dyer quote, "If you believe it will work out, you'll see opportunities. If you believe it won't, you will see obstacles." So it's important with how Mercury is approaching things with Saturn. Is Mercury going to let Saturn weigh itself down? Or is Mercury waxing leading edge to Saturn going, hey, here's a possibility, here's an idea, here's a solution, here's an opportunity. Again, working through that physical Capricorn stuff through the retrograde. Mercury,
Kim?
yes,
I just thought that'd be a good segue to advertise that we do have an expanded version of 2016 forecast on our forecasting webinars page. Again, we did a 2-hour exhaustive look, comprehensive look at 2016. It's posted on the forecasting webinars page. You can get the PDF with those audio and video links on the first page of that PDF. All the slides for printout available on our website on the forecasting webinars page. Thank you.
And honey, while we're at it, we should just tell anybody, anytime you get one of our webinars and you get the PDF, the very first page are the links to listen to Well, the first link is a video of this podcast that you're watching live if you want to watch it again. Then there's a link to have an audio download so that you can listen to it on your iPod walking the dog. And then there's a video download if you want to put it on your iPad.
No video download, honey. There's the permanent video link, which is basically the YouTube post. And then there's that streaming audio.
Oh, streaming.
If you just want to listen to it right on your computer, just copy and paste that streaming audio MP3 link into your internet browser and it'll just start playing. Or just click on it. And then there's the download link, like you say, so to make the audio portable, put it on another device. So 3 ways to enjoy any webinar that we produce here at EAN. And that's also inclusive of our Segment 1 and Segment 2 webinars that we offer for continuing students that become registered students by purchasing a segment of our course. Very similar format, so hope that was clear for everybody. Mercury retrograde, thank you.
Thank you, Hetty. Okay, so Mercury waning sextiles to Chiron. You can see dates and degrees. And so this is the last quarter phase, but it's the 300-degree mark. Mercury's made it 5/6 of the way around the circle from Chiron. So here we have to recognize self-responsibility again for situations in life and recognizing how to self-improve. You know, to me, this is coming from the archetype of Chiron. Chiron is where we carry our wounds, but when we heal those wounds, we turn them into the gifts, as the cliche goes. Well, the healing of the wounding is making self-improvements, the Virgo Pisces. And it's recognizing that it's not perfect, Pisces, on planet Earth. It's imperfect here. The lessons here are to evolve, grow, learn. So Mercury is receiving from Chiron, waning sextiles, how it is that we need to feel a more deeper connection to the Earth, and yet how we want to move forward in whatever ways are highest and best for us. It will also bring up the need to have some honest communication efforts on deep, deep levels. If we want to distort this aspect, we'll go into victimization, denial, escapism, back to those control games, and they can be overt Capricorn or covert Pisces. You ever heard of the person who controls through the sense of victimization? And so, another little quote here, how people treat you is their karma. How you react is yours. It's a Wayne Dyer quote. This might also belong on the Mercury-Saturn page. But to me, it was reminding me of Chiron, Mercury-Chiron right here. How are we going to communicate with people? Mercury, here's those waning squares to Uranus. Again, remember that first one here on the winter solstice? Here's the second two. Mercury's direct January 25th, so it's like bam, bam. You can see these 3 aspects only move 0.5 degree between Mercury and Uranus. Now they're the last quarter squares, 270 degrees, so it's the crises in consciousness last quarter phase. Crises around the ability to understand the larger picture of anything versus our personal viewpoint, Uranus and Aries. And what we are going to have to do here is face some of the limitations in that self-focus, Uranus and Aries, and ask for feedback. Now, again, these 2 right here, Mercury's conscious mind, Uranus is the unconscious mind on an individuated level. Uranus is always wanting to throw things up to the surface into consciousness. Mercury retrograde is open to Uranus throwing it up to the surface. The last quarter square Can we make sense of it? What does it mean? So am I going to cling to all of my old attitudes and thoughts and control mechanisms, last quarter square, Capricorn, or am I going to open up, last quarter square, to a bigger, broader picture and a deeper understanding? Can I open up and understand where someone else is coming from? You can see by the distortions, polarization, standoffs, control games, outbursts with communications and actions. All I need to say here is turn on your mainstream news with the U.S. presidential candidates. Turn on world news with what's happening between the Sunni Muslims in Saudi Arabia and the Shia Muslims in Iran. Those are the two biggest Muslim countries, and they are really having struggles for power and control right now, and it kind of broke through into consciousness for me. Sometimes when I'm working, I will have mainstream news on the TV with no sound, and I can just watch bullet points of words and put my own astrological reflections and insights on things. And so it really became conscious for me, Mercury to Uranus, about how Saudi Arabia and Iran are the two major factions of Muslims, Sunnis and Shias respectively. And how, if you go back, to 600-700 AD, there wasn't a split, and how that split came over time. And I didn't have enough to research it on the internet, but I found it something fascinating. Mercury, Uranus, points of view popping up into consciousness that I then want to have deeper, broader understandings around. Mark Twain, laws control the lesser man. Right conduct controls the greater one. Here is another little spot of facts that hit me in the news today. Here's the chart for the state of Oklahoma. November 18th, 1907, 9:16 a.m. Central Standard Time, Guthrie, Oklahoma. Did you know that before the Bakken oil deposits were discovered in Montana, North Dakota, Oklahoma was, I think, the second biggest oil producing state? They discovered oil in Oklahoma in 1897. In the 1890s, 1892, we had 3 Neptune-Pluto conjunctions in Gemini. And some people think Neptune rules oil. I agree with that one. Some people think Pluto rules oil. Doesn't matter. Those Neptune-Pluto conjunctions that came in the 1880s, oil was discovered in the tail end of the 19th century, around that time period. And it took off in Oklahoma. And what was the little detail in the news today? It was the fact that in the last week, let me put it this way. Oklahoma is now the most earthquake-prone area in the world. Now, that's not how big the earthquakes are. It's just how many. It is the quantity of earthquakes. Oklahoma has went from having 24 earthquakes in 2012, greater than 3.0, to over 800 earthquakes last year, 2015, above 3.0. From 24 earthquakes in 2012 to over 800 earthquakes in 2015. Why, you might ask? Fracking, oil. And they're having to shut down some of the wastewater parts of these oil companies because they have been putting so much waste oil into the earth, it's causing earthquakes. Look for this to be in the news in the next few days, and look for this to be, quote unquote, shaking it up Mercury Aquarius, as people are realizing what we're doing to the earth, Capricorn, with oil, whether you want it Neptune or Uranus, but I just thought, wasn't that an interesting fact? Here's the Mercury retrograde degrees, 1 degree Aquarius back to 1455. Mercury direct January 25th. So Mercury's going to go stationary direct right on the south node of the state of Oklahoma. You know, second house is resources, personally and mundane. And so it's shock and trauma going on here as everybody's finally waking up in the consensus news. This is state government shutting down fracking companies because of all the earthquakes. Just a little tidbit for you to understand how the, again, Mercury turning stationary retrograde here this first week of January, it might be interesting just keeping up with the news that is popping through. Mercury is making waning semi-squares to Neptune, waning sextiles 300 degrees to Chiron, waning semi-squares 315 degrees to Neptune. Neptune's moving from last quarter to balsamic phase with Neptune. So making the extra communication effort, listening and speaking. This is similar to a couple of things I said in the last Mercury retrograde because it's still waning phase except getting closer to a conjunction. Hearing God Goddess through others. Releasing any de facto God Goddess projections on to others. Facing expectations with reality and self-responsibility. There can be letdowns here, Capricorn to Pisces, if we're not facing reality. We are really asking for reviewing some of our deepest beliefs and doing that through communications and doing that through taking ultimate self-responsibility for every situation in our world, in our life, in our relationships. The distortions will be an inability or unwillingness to listen, avoiding, neglecting communications. The whole Piscean escapism, checking out again, that's going on. This aspect could also bring us news with climate change, just like Neptune in Pisces can. Pisces ruling the natural world on the ultimate level. Assumption and lack of communication are the number one relationship killers. We all perceive differently. We've lived different lives. We have different views. Understand that before getting angry, Pisces unconscious anger, at someone for not believing what you believe. There could be another aspect going on between all of the differences taking place between countries. My God's better than your God. My version of Islam is better than your version of Islam. My version of Christianity is better than yours. Another thing that I just haven't brought out yet in specific aspects, and this might be one that goes with the Mercury-Pluto conjunctions, consensus news, is all of those conservative rights people that are so anti-federal government that they are now they've taken over a wildlife refugee in Oregon and fighting the government over because it put 2 ranchers in jail for not respecting public law on public lands. We won't go into a whole lot of detail on this one, but I'm right, you're wrong. You listen to me, and I'm going to defend myself with guns in battle if necessary until you back down and do what I want you to do. And so there's a lot of disagreement between these right-wing factions with the public federal government over who's right and who's wrong and who gets to be in charge and who has control. These are the Mercury-Pluto conjunctions going on right here. And here is the second and third one with Mercury going stationary direct January 25th, 15 Capricorn. And again, all three of these conjunctions are traveling within a degree and a half. So it's a pretty tight orb here. Now, Pluto is always death and rebirth of the desire nature. And with these Mercury conjunctions in Capricorn, it's recognizing what we can do and what we cannot do, what we can achieve and what we cannot achieve, what we have power and control over and what we do not have power and control over. It's a mental maturation process to the depth of our soul. This is also going to be one of these strong aspects with this Mercury retrograde, and it's going to pack the aha punch at the end of it, Mercury direct, along with Mercury's last quarter squares to Pluto. So will this standoff get reduced to guns with the situation in Oregon? Will Saudi Arabia and Iran, get reduced to war? The consensus conversation is that they have been fighting with each other for a long, long time, and they've always had the ability to back off before they ultimately got to war. The last war was, I want to say in the 1980s. And it wasn't very sophisticated. In other words, it was more trenches in the ground. But the things that are upsetting right now between Saudi Arabia and Iran, it's the masses uprisings. It's the Uranus and Aries anger with Pluto and Capricorn and busting out. Saudi Arabia is a monarchy. I did not know this history, that it was the United States and probably the CIA that helped overthrow a democratically elected government in Iran and put the Ayatollah Khomeini back in Iran back in the early 70s. I'll get the date with the chart. Fascinating stuff. I'm finding myself drawn to read more about the history of Saudi Arabia and Iran right now. And if you are interested, you may want to do some Wikipedia searches on that.
It was actually the Shah of Iran that we supported for so long, and then he was overthrown by the masses, so to speak, and the religious ayatollahs came in to kind of do their thing at that point. Remember the Shah of Iran?
Yes, and I remember in the early 1980s, that's when they had the refugees, or not refugees, the hostages, and that.
Yeah, Jimmy Carter had to deal with the hostage crisis, and.
Yeah. It was fascinating to start reading the history of that, and I knew bits and pieces, but I was just touching upon it. So I bring that up for you. So here again we have the distortions, the ideological differences, and the power games over that, overtly and covertly. Resource upsets, and I haven't mentioned refugee crises, and that is just totally part of the Uranus-Pluto squares with Saturn in Sagittarius, refugees looking for a homeland. But on a personal level, can we have a mental maturation? Can we have a responsibility, self-responsibility within our soul that allows us then to co-consciously co-create with universal source? Another Wayne Dyer quote, "Everything you are against weakens you. Everything you are for empowers you. So lots of details we could get into. The last aspect I wanted to speak about, though, is the fact that the North Node is making a waxing trine to Mercury. The South Node in Pisces at these degrees is making a waning sextile to Mercury. All I did is put in the North Node aspects. The South Node aspects are the opposite with Pisces. Here, there is a good potential to understand any situation and evolve communications. With the South Node, the past waning sextiles to Mercury, ready to be released, ready to release old victimization patterns, old mental patterns of futility, depression, etc. North Node is moving forward, helping ourself, Virgo, helping others, serving, self-responsibility, Capricorn. So these aspects will fit in with the waxing trines to Jupiter, and they're almost a communication relief valve to all of the other aspects that are going on, that outside of Chiron sextiles, all the other aspects are what we will call tension or stressful aspects. You know, again, the squares to Chiron, Uranus, conjunctions to Pluto. What the distortions are that can come along, we have to be careful again of the good old laziness of trines, the excuse making, South Node Pisces, blaming others, Pisces, Virgo. So you would really want to honor the emotions here, get clarity within yourself, and then really make that effort to understand and communicate with others. And Jupiter will add on to this and increase the intuition that is going on. I quickly brought in the U.S. chart here. You can see where Mercury is. I used the 2:13 a.m. rising chart with the 9th house Pluto. Mercury's retrograde in Capricorn. There's going to be last quarter squares of Mercury to Chiron. There's going to be waning inconjuncts to Mars, outer adjustments, disagreements. Here's our politicians babbling away for control. It's going to have the oppositions to itself, and it will have conjunctions to the U.S. Pluto. So here's this T-square that the U.S. chart has regardless of rising sign, regardless of the house, July 4th house. Here's the T-square with Chiron that Mercury is very, very strongly activating. And here's some of the feistiness that's going on. Here is the I want to be in charge. I want to have the control. Here's all of the patriotism that is coming through in regards to this. Uranus, of course, is up here in Aries, marching closer and closer to Chiron. I don't know if we're going to see a lessening of gun violence for a while in this country. President Obama is working with gun control advocates, trying to see what he can do from presidential authority, but I don't think we're at the turnaround point. I mean, if we compare it to, let's see, LGBT issues and the same-sex marriage issue and the decision that was made in the Supreme Court, we reached a tipping point with that issue. Now, the battle's not over, but in regards to the whole gun control issue, that's not reached a tipping point yet, and we could see more violence excited through this this particular Mercury retrograde, you know, especially in regards to individual rights, into ideological interpretations of our laws and principles. Just expect it to be volatile the entire month of January, as Iowa has its caucuses. Anybody knows that date? Type it out. Leroy, speak up and tell me, because to me it just
4 weeks.
all the way through Mercury retrograde. Won't it be interesting, though, as Mercury goes stationary direct, making second and third conjunction to Pluto, and the second and third last quarter squares to Uranus. Maybe there might be some caucus upsets. Who knows? Stay tuned. Now, here is what I found for charts for Saudi Arabia. The 1902 chart, I'm not going to remember my details. I was reading them, but my right brain has been going too much on intuitive levels. One of these charts is when the House of Saudi Arabia House of Saud. When one of these two charts is when the House of Saud came back into control of Saudi Arabia. Maybe it was the January 15th one. It's hard to do mundane charts. Just like there's much disagreement over which chart to use with the July 4th, 1776 chart in the U.S. These are the two main charts with Saudi Arabia. I put this one in, the one for January 15th, 1902, 6:52 a.m. Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Riyadh. 24 Capricorn rising. Look at these Capricorn planets. Saturn 19, Sun 24, Jupiter 25, Mercury 2. Look at this Mercury retrograde right here on this chart. Again, I want to say this is the one when the Saudi House of Saud came back into power, but I could be totally wrong. The other one that's used is September 22nd, 1932, 5:56 p.m. Again, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Forgive my pronunciations. This one here has a ton of Virgo planets, which would put the Mercury retrograde up here in the 10th house, making the trines through all of this. This is the one I drew up first, and it just hit me, this chart right here, and how Pluto in Capricorn is going to start coming through all of this, while Uranus over here in the third house of communications is squaring it all. Stay tuned. I might be working with these charts for a while. Just to see where I feel they are more reflective. With this chart, the Mercury retrograde has the oppositions to Pluto, squares to Uranus, and you can see Pluto's up here, Uranus is right here. Both charts call for lots of things to be shook up in Saudi Arabia. And as you know, it has a lot to do with the price of oil decreasing, the oil gluts, for various reasons, and the downfall of the Bakken oil field up here in North Dakota, north of us. I'm not going to get into any big explanations on these charts. I just thought it might be nice to include the mercurial details. There's no really agreed upon chart with Iran, but this one seems to hit through the strongest, and this one is April 1st, 1979, usually between 2 to 3 p.m. in Tehran, Iran. So I just went for 2:30 and just averaged it. It puts the Mercury retrograde here in the 6th house, anywhere from 2 to 3 p.m. taking place. The oppositions to Jupiter, this can be, Mercury right now opposing this Jupiter. This is the upsets of the masses in this country over the cleric that was just beheaded by Saudi Arabia. You can see that we'll have the squares to Pluto. You can see that we have the Uranus-Pluto squares. getting ready to hit natal Pluto. So I don't know if we'll see these guys out of the news very soon yet. You can see that they're getting ready to have a nodal axis return. You see that they have Neptune square the nodes. The spiritual T-square is going to hit them over the next 2 years. Again, I don't know if I would look for things to calm down very soon between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Stay tuned. It may be something that you might like to watch in the news for a while. And so, any questions or comments from anybody? I'm going to go through the last 3 slides. I love to put this one in. I'm assuming this website is Zazzle, ZAZZLE.com, will actually allow you to purchase this t-shirt. I just thought it was cute and funny when I run across it, so I like to put it in every time because you survived me. Sharing my Mercury retrograde comments over the last 2 hours. Here's all my endpoints I like to put in. Mercury retrograde in Aquarius-Capricorn. How do I quiet my mind and listen to my inner voice? How do I detach and objectify upsets in my world? What is my next step and self-responsibility? How inwardly secure am I? How do I love myself and others? How do I take charge of my inner world? What is my next level of leadership? Here are the future Mercury retrograde dates in degrees throughout the rest of this year. Our next free webinar will be April 25th, 6 p.m. and we'll be at Mountain Daylight Time again. And this retrograde will be contained entirely within the Mars retrograde in Sag Scorpio. So, as Mars retrograde in Scorpio opposes Sun in Taurus, it will also have Mercury-Mars oppositions. And I'm going to guess, I know there's 3 of them. It's going to be 3 Mercury-Mars retrogrades in Taurus, Scorpio. So it'll almost be like a continuation of the Mercury waxing squares to Mars that we're having with this retrograde cycle. And here are the future retrograde dates. And relative to setting this in Mercury retrograde shadow, I've already had to change a few classes. Stay tuned. We always try to make sure that any of our forecasting or educational webinars give you at least 2 to 3 weeks notice before they take place publicly. But I have been having to change a few of them. But the one to really note that is not going to change is next week, next Wednesday the 13th, 6 p.m. I will look at Jupiter's retrograde in Virgo and continue to focus in more detail on that spiritual T-square. We're starting to notice the mental health issues, Virgo, that are coming through in the U.S. We are noticing some health and wellness scandals. If you didn't hear, the guy who bought one of the parasitic drugs and increased the price 700%, he was a hedge fund or inside trader, and he's gotten arrested, and he's arrested now for insider trading, I think, on the stock market. So he's in trouble on multiple issues. So we'll take a look at Jupiter retrograde in Virgo and how its polarity into Pisces is really asking us to deepen our sense of intuition and put it into practical use. All right, so any follow-up with questions or comments, Leroy?
Nope. Nice work, honey. All's clear.
All right. Well, then I thank you all very much for tuning in here to this Mercury retrograde. Remember to slow down and breathe deep and take time to process through this busiest retrograde of the year. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Adios.